Hello and welcome to So Many Games, independent video game coverage from a passionate group of people. Please check out everything we do at somanygames.co.uk. My name is Jason, and for episode 10 of the podcast, we are dedicating it to AdventureX, an adventure gaming event that was just held in London on the 22nd and the 23rd of November 2025. The event has been running since 2011 and is filled with developers showcasing their games, but also runs panels headed by industry members on a bunch of different subjects from the gaming sphere. Not only am I going to share my experiences of the show today, but while I was there, I interviewed some of the attendees which you're going to hear right on this episode. As these were all taken at the show, there is going to be some background noise, but my new portable mics did the job, and as you'll hear, kept up a great standard of audio. Now, the plan was to keep this to a one-off special episode, but some of the interviews went longer than I expected, which is great, fantastic. But because they're so long, just going to make this episode so much longer. So I decided to split all this into two separate episodes. Part 2 will be Old Skies Dedicated, as it will feature a 35 to 40 minute chat with Dave Gilbert from Wadget Eye, and a chat with the game composer Thomas Regin, and a little chat with Saly Beaumont about her recent BAFTA breakthrough announcement. So keep a lookout for that when it releases in hopefully a couple of weeks' time. Now, before we get into the interviews, I do have some small housekeeping. Our Patreon launch went really well and we welcomed in some amazing people. So a big thank you to the Letter 10, Ruz, John, Cami, Antonia, and Kurz. Guys, thank you. I'm still a bit shell-shocked that you value our work enough to support us monetarily, and me and the team are incredibly grateful to you. Thank you. If you want to join the So Many Games crew and support independent video game media, then you can find a link in the show description. Also, if you do enjoy this episode, we would love for you to leave a review and a 5-star rating on your favourite podcast platform. It would really help us to be discovered by more people and encourage the algorithms to be kind to us. Alright, with all that said, let's get in to AdventureX. AdventureX was held in the Hub, a section of the London South Bank University, and it was the perfect venue. There was plenty of room, even when there were many people about. It never felt overwhelming, which just lent into the laid-back, chilled atmosphere I felt throughout the weekend. And there was a well-stocked coffee shop open throughout the weekend. What more can you ask for? This being the first AdventureX I had attended, I was pleasantly surprised to find not only this welcoming atmosphere, but just a bunch of friendly, kind and approachable people. There is something to be said about the majority of the gaming community, as they are some of the nicest people, and this was in abundance here too. Two examples of this were being stopped by Bayon, a developer from Blue Tango Street, who wanted to say thank you to me in person for being the first outlet to publish a review of one of their games. I was quite speechless and very touched by the whole thing, and it was one of my favourite moments of the weekend. So if you're listening, Bayon, thank you. The other arrived from a developer called Andreas. He was over with his brother to promote their upcoming game, The Tragedy at Deer Creek. And as I was playing the demo, he sat down next to me to ask how I was finding it. And we ended up having a half-hour chat not only on the game, but about life living in a woodland village in Sweden. Both unforgettable moments that will always stay with me. But of course, the main stars of the weekend was the games. There was an array of different genres of adventure games for us to try out. Dusk Punk, A Week in the Life of a Social Giraffe, Broken Sword, and my personal favourite from the show, The Tragedy at Deer Creek, were just some of the examples of what was on offer. And this leads us to our first interview, as there was one game in attendance that if the developer was there, I just had to speak to them. This game is the Dark Queen of Mortholme, and one of our standout games of the year, and the developer was indeed there. And Mosu was very kind to spare some time to talk to me. Can you just give us a little introduction to yourself and your history in game development?
So I've been developing games kind of since I graduated from university, like in 2014. just kind of little funny game jam games and like my own little silly solo project, very short, very just putting them out on itch.io, and not really thinking about. I mean, obviously, I would love to do games professionally just so I could have more time to do them. But I was kind of like chill and I'm just making them as a fun thing. But yeah, the Dark Queen of Mortholme was kind of like the first one that kind of I spent so much effort on, and then apparently people liked that, so it became like a kind of a successful enough thing that I was like, oh, this is this is getting into more like a professional territory now. So yeah, very sort of amateur beginnings.
I mean, have you learned a lot then from making this game?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I learn a lot from like making every single game because I often have like this sort of very story-based idea, so they are very different, and I need to develop like new skill set for everything. I mean, yeah, like this one was very like animation heavy. I have an animation degree, but it was like 3D, so like doing more 2D animation is I love doing that and getting better at it, and especially coding. I think this was like my far most involved coding effort because I make stuff up, and still managing to make it work somehow. Definitely some bad go though. Next time I will do a better job because at the last stages of making this, everything was really collapsing. If I couldn't like add another feature if I wanted to because the spaghetti would die. So I definitely learned what not to do.
Where did the idea for the game come from?
It's like preceded by a lot of like obviously experiences playing games with like difficult bosses and like finding it kind of amusing that there's this narrative of like coming back and learning about them and like, oh, what would the boss think about me being so shit at this game? I think, but then there were like also if there was a Tumblr post that was like about how when playing Pokemon, like you get to like use potions on your own Pokemon, and the other trainers never do that, so you kind of have an edge. But then when you come to like the Elite Four, and they actually use a hyper potion on their own Pokemon, and you're like, hey, I'm allowed to do that. That's like a player move. And I thought like that sense of like, there's a lot of games that can do that, like Undertale and stuff like this sense of playing with the idea that the opponent could have like a mind just like you do as a player and have that sort of agency. And I was like, oh, but what if like you really leaned into that? And I think the final thing that clicked was like I played Katana Zero, loved it, but it has slight spoiler warning, a final boss that's kind of like supposed to be, there's like a meta narrative for why do you have the power to like save and resave and try again. And it was like in universe, like this other character also had this power, so it was like, ooh, they're gonna like try again as well. But it was like they didn't really do a proper job. Like it didn't really feel like a big element in it. I was like, I really want to try to do something that really feels like you're playing against a player. So yeah, that's kind of the start of it. And then yeah, I just started thinking more about like, oh, there would be some really cool like meta narratives and character development possibilities, and it would not go away. Coding wise or like game mechanics wise, I wasn't sure how to pull it off because it's kind of like tricky. Like, how do you actually structure that so it works as a video game? But after like a couple of years, just keeping it in the back of my mind, I finally kind of figured out like, okay, yeah, I make it into this structured narrative, yeah. And then it was just like, okay, I have to do it now. I've been thinking about it for too long.
Was the main goal always to make people think differently about endgame bosses? I know it had, for me especially, like playing through Hollow Knight Silksong. Was that always a goal for you?
I guess from the beginning the goal was just like, this would be funny. But like, I think it's kind of it's inseparable from the concept. Like it will definitely happen. Like I knew that, but the further I got into the writing and the more like the Dark Queen developed as a character, I was like, oh yeah, this is like a really interesting exercise in thinking about like what kind of a person would be in this position and how would they. So I think like because like just presenting the idea makes you think about it so much. It's like, yeah, of course that would then apply to games like that you play after. Now I'm kind of losing my train of thought. but yeah, like I am a big fan of like perception flipping in general, and the sort of narrative implications of that, and then like games that make you think, and then provide this like maybe like also for not outside of video games, like interpersonal relationships. Like I think like when people do think about a perspective that they don't think from a perspective they don't usually think of, it kind of trains you into being a bit more empathetic in general. So it is definitely a goal of mine to make people open to these sort of new perspectives.
The script of the game was also very very cool for when we played the game, and like, you know, even things like when the hero says to the queen about the gate tower, and the queen's like, "What gate tower?" You know, and they're like, "Oh, well, of course she wouldn't know about the gate tower because all she does is stay in this one room. You know, she doesn't know anything out of the throne room that she lives in." And that also made me think about these bosses in a different light as well. You know, how much fun did you have, like, looking at these different ways of bosses and writing that script?
So much fun. Like, I think this sort of diegetic type of, like, what's the word I'm thinking about? Like, the diegetic handling of game mechanics. I love it. I love it so much. I love it when games do it. I love thinking about it. Whenever there's like a game abstraction, it kind of, I mean, it doesn't turn me off, but like I prefer it when games try to be as immersive as possible. So I was just like all in, like, let's make every single mechanic kind of exist diegetically, like every single like weird thing about like okay, like why is there health? Why is there why does the person come, like, keep coming up? Why is the queen always in the room? Like, let's think about like what implications would it actually have. It's such a cool character creation exercise, having to like come up with answers to all of that, and the fact that it kind of ended up making this like very compelling character about like this sort of lonely figure at the top who is so like trapped almost in their own mind of like this role that they've created for themselves, like, oh, I'm the most powerful, I don't need to go anywhere else, everything else is below me. And it's such a sad and tragic character. It was so much fun to pump out like all the different facts that we know about bosses, about like, yeah, how they never learn, how they never change, how they never leave the room, and bringing all that in as like additional tidbits of tragedy there.
Yeah, exactly. Something else that really stuck out to me when I played the game was how the player can play the queen differently to the, you know, from the expectations of an end boss. You know, you can, if you want to, go down that route with the dialogue choices, but you can also go down a different road with making different choices in the dialogue. And for me personally, to see a more emotional side to a boss was really interesting. And, you know, was it always the idea to explore that side of her and to have that mechanic in the game?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of comes from the fact that I started thinking about the characters, like, oh, this is actually a really juicy character, so of course I want to go into it. Actually, an earlier version of the script had like way more involvement in like the psychology. Like, it actually had like these multiple branching paths that kind of like lead you to think about, like, there were like 4 different aspects of the psyche. Like, there was like this perfectionism route, and like sort of like fear of failure route, like kind of all different aspects of like the same idea of how would that person end up being so afraid of change and so sure of like that sort of stuff. But it ended up being kind of a mess. I ended up just deciding to just focus more on like the relationship and the so now it's a bit more like 2 different routes of like, okay, do you like, some I've seen like people play it as like, oh, like they really just role play the giant, like the last boss, and they're like really get into character, like, oh, I'm so unforgiving, I'm so mean, haha. But then like there's the route of like actually being kind of curious about the world. There's like a curiosity meter where like whenever you say something that kind of you're interested in the outside world, like you're gonna get more. Like it's going to be noticed by the hero, like, oh, like you actually do kind of want to go outside, like you're lying to yourself here. And then there's like I call it the hug meter, because that's the one that ends up in the animation, that where you hug them. It's like, if you really start to respect the player, like I really wanted there to be different ways to role play, just so like the player would feel the character as a bit of like a extension of themselves, and then get a bit more into like immersively into the story. So having that sort of leeway in imagining like, okay, what kind of a person is your version of the queen, like it was really important for me.
And just to finish, obviously the visual direction is really striking in the game. What can you tell us about this side of it, and why did you choose this particular style?
I mean, it was kind of an easy decision for me because it was like, what is the genre, like the OG of the genre, like what people mostly know. Difficult bosses that you have to try over and over again is Dark Souls. I'm not even, like, I myself am more of a Sekiro fan than a Dark Souls fan, honestly, but it was like, this is classic, and also Gothic architecture is beautiful. I do love me tall armored woman. Like, it was just so much fun to do that sort of moody thing. That it was like, I didn't even think about it. I was like, of course, it's gotta be Gothic. And also, Gothic style really lends itself well to the tragedy, because it is a tragic story. So yeah, it's a perfect fit, I think.
Fascinating stuff there from Mosu, and an absolute joy to find out more on the creation of the game and its development. The other main element to AdventureX was the panels. They ran the entire weekend from opening to close, which gave the show the chance to cover a whole range of different subjects. From John Ingold's presentation always trade up from inspiration to storyline, to Dominic Amato's keynote, defeating imposter syndrome, the Threepwood method, there was plenty to get your teeth into. Each panel was well presented and well researched, and it brought such a fascinating element to the weekend, and one that I learned much through about the industry. And our next interview comes from one person that was on the Finding the Funny Comedy Writing in Adventure Games panel, and is also the writer and narrative designer of the hit The Séance of Blake Manor. So when I sat down with Dave McCabe, I was excited to learn as much as I could about the game's development, and to kick us off, I asked how he had found the reception the game had received since its launch.
It's been received really well. Like, we've got a load of 5-star reviews and 10 out of 10s and high 90s scores and stuff. Not all of them are like that. On Steam, it's 97% positive with somewhere like 700 reviews so far. So like everywhere, it's definitely people like it, and that's very gratifying when you spent a few years working on something, for sure. But it's also gratifying because it's such a deeply personal story for us. To talk about our history, our culture, our mythology, the what would you call it? The national traumas that our people have experienced and have done to one another as well as had done to us. And it was, I mean, it's great to take something so personal, put so much yourself into it, and for it to go out and be received so well. Because there was definitely doubts about whether an audience would show up for an Irish game. Like a game that wore its Irishness on its sleeve rather than just being made in Ireland. But people have shown up, they really liked it. We're getting people asking for follow-up reading material, which is, that's phenomenal for us,
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the biggest elements I took from the game was the Irish mythology and just all the things you touched up upon there. It was really interesting for someone like me who hasn't necessarily delved into those kind of aspects before. So to learn a little bit about that was really interesting.
Certainly when I was in school, like, no one really talked about Irish mythology. We didn't learn about the Tuatha De Danann, we didn't learn about any of that sort of stuff. We learned a handful of stories about like Cuchulainn, but mostly, and that's, not going into too much of a rabbit hole here, but a lot of that was about the educational reform from De Valera, like the after the Irish independence, and like what he thought was right to be shown as a staunch Catholic man. And that sort of coloured what we would have learned. And a lot of stuff that myself and the team have learned has not been through education. It's been through sitting around by fires and talking to people and, digging into our own stuff ourselves, And that's a big part, again, why it's important for us to sort of share this, because it's not just like people outside of Ireland are learning about these things. A lot of the times people inside Ireland are going, oh, I didn't know that. Like, I didn't know about these characters and this complexity and the 9 waves and all that sort of stuff.
And is that how the idea of the game came to be, through this Irish mythology and the stories, or was it something else that made this game come to be?
A lot of things came together. We had made 2 Dark Side games, and we were looking. I mean, I personally, after writing all the jokes for those things, I needed a bit of a change. It was around the time COVID and stuff hit, and we kind of just felt like it was harder to kind of come up with funny stuff, and so we kind of thought maybe we'd look at doing something a bit bigger and a bit more gritty. We'd always wanted to do something in our mythology and our history and stuff, so that was always there. And then I guess there was a number of other factors that sort of led, and we hit a sort of a point where a lot of the things we were talking about and interested in sort of aligned around this project. And yeah, so it wasn't like a very conscious decision. It was just lots of stuff that's sort of swimming around and we talk about. And that's really how our process for figuring out what we want to do is. It's just, kicking around ideas and find something that excites the three of us and the rest of the team, and try put some shape to that and see if it could work as a game, and if there's an interesting story there, and kind of just run with that,
Obviously, it's all set within a manor. What was it like designing that during the development? Did you have any like late development changes that caused trouble, or any early development kind of stuff?
We did a bunch of tours of old manors around Ireland, and we took a lot of inspiration from that. Now, it's bigger and more sprawling than any of those manors are in the real world, because we wanted to make it a bigger game space. And we sort of, it is an old Irish manor that's become a hotel, so it's got these sort of extensions and changed some of the rooms around and that kind of thing. So it lets it be a bit bigger than maybe historically a place that it might have been. But yeah, it was just strange because the first thing you do is white box the whole thing. Is you're running on just these empty wide corridors of the thing and trying to feel if that feels good or not. And we adjusted a lot of it as we went. We dropped entire sections. There was an old castle on the, if you think of the manor from the front, on the right hand side is the Blake residence, and on the left hand side, and if you might find some of the old Eldritch House key art, you see there's this old dilapidated castle on the left, and that was a whole part of the final sequence. There was a botanic house set in the grounds. There was the bathhouse you could go into, and all these. So there was, we had lots of other spaces we thought would be really good to include. But as we kind of worked through it, and the basement was bigger. As we worked through it, and we're kind of refining, does this need to be so big, or can we take this and put this somewhere else? And just iterating as you go, and losing stuff along the way. And sometimes you're losing white box rooms, and sometimes you're losing quite developed rooms because they're just not serving a purpose for the player's experience.
I was really always impressed with how you gated off certain parts of the manor through believable story plots. It always seemed, lifelike, not just for the purpose of it being a video game, you've just kind of gated it off. Was this always in the works to lock certain parts of the manor off, or until certain conditions had been met, or?
Well, we always sort of knew that certain places would open on day 3 and such like that. But we did try a lot of different types of gating inside. It's quite overwhelming, and we know that it's overwhelming. When you begin day 2 and you begin the game proper, and you're like, well, here's most of the place. We don't roll it out in the same way you might in a different game, because we kind of want a big part of the feeling is to be, what have I got myself into? There's a lot of people here. There's a lot of evidence. And when you see that cutscene where you meet all the guests, and the feeling should be a little bit like, ooh, oh, my stomach turned a little bit. I don't like the scale of this, because that's what Ward is feeling in that moment. And we want that to, go through to the player. And so we could have gone, oh, the East Wing and the West Wing, they're not open, or the upper floors, but we wanted you to have the freedom to, if you want, you can go and spend the first half of the game just trying to break into people's bedrooms and find what you can find from that. Or you can, do all the stuff that's downstairs. And we didn't want to gate it too heavily, but yes, we did need to, we close off certain areas early in the game and then unlock them a little bit. And then day 3 unlocks, I don't want to say too much in case someone's not played it, but day 3 unlocks new areas, because that still feels nice, and a sense of progression and excitement to have a new area to go to and such. And, once you find your way into such and such a thing. But it was a lot of playtesting and a lot of iterating, and a lot of balancing, just trying to find what felt right for testers.
No, as a player, I was quite grateful for the gating, for the reasons that you said. It didn't feel overwhelming. I still had enough of the manor to explore, but it gave me that wanting to get into those places that I couldn't get into just yet, like the basement and the catacombs.
Yeah, we wanted to give you that promise and that mystery of what's behind this door. Why can't I get into it? That's a pretty ominous place with the big red red stained glass windows and all that stuff. And it's just, it's trying to get that balance right. Like we did lock off more things for longer, and we felt that it actually became really restrictive. Maybe something that like it's probably not clear sometimes the players that they can't get into those spaces until certain things are met. And so maybe they spend one or two players have spent some time trying to get access spaces that just can't, and maybe we should find a way to communicate that better. But again, my thinking, at least, and I'm going to speak for the entire team here, is like, oh, how would you know that? It's perfectly believable that like a detective would try to get into a race and just not be able to, and they won't be able to get it until some other things happen, and they lose time doing that, and that's part of the experience of giving you the freedom to waste time, and that's really key to the experience.
And it was a really good feeling anyway as a player, like to finally get into the Blake residence at the end of the game. It was such a, oh yes, finally. You know, I've been looking at this door, been walking up to it for so many hours, and finally I'm actually managed to get into it. And when I did, and it was really cool. And
yeah, and there is, like, we know as soon as people see those or any kind of thing, they go, I'm obviously going to be over there. That's a key part of the late game. I know that's going to happen because I've played games before and I understand a certain amount of structure, you know. And the same way when people approach the mystery and go, well, I understand how mysteries work, so I know this thing and that thing, and you're taking a lot of knowledge of how games and how mysteries and stories work into it. So we knew that, for example, the basement, that room, the graveyard, they're all places that players are like, what's behind that gate? I want to get into it. On the flip side, we also included gates and doors you would never get to open because we don't want you to know exactly how things are unfold. And you know, getting that balance right is again a real tricky one because, like, you know, every time you see a door, it's a promise that there's something behind it. But that's not necessarily true in our game, and we try to flag it in small ways. Like, you might say a certain thing that goes, I don't think I'll be going in here or whatever, but you never know. And hopefully, then when you do get in there, the payoff is worthwhile.
obviously, a big mechanic of the game is the time mechanic. And it was really fascinating for me to experience and how you dealt with time. And I was really appreciative that it wasn't always a ticking clock. You know, I had time, although there was time and time got took away from me, I still felt I had time to explore and to figure stuff out without. So I felt a little bit of pressure, but I didn't feel too much. You know, and I'm just really interested in how that was implemented and, you know, how much of a struggle it was to get that right.
So the first version of the game was actually linear and didn't have time at all. It's something we had talked about really early on, that we could do this, and how would we approach it, and what way would we use time. And then we spent probably the guts of a year building the game without time. It was a linear thing. And then we just knew it wasn't feeling right. And in a weekend, Trasa, who's the design lead and the tech lead, just tore out a load of stuff and put in a time system. And immediately you could feel like, I mean, it's a game about death and grief, and to have like this ticking clock, it feels really thematically nice. And that tension that, like, suddenly, because as a linear game, I'm always going to get there, I'm going to succeed, I don't have to worry about that. Whereas once you add in time, you add in the risk of failure. You could get to the end and not have stuff. And that suddenly changes the whole feeling of the game, you know? But Trasa and the QAs and everyone put a load of work into like testing and making certain there was enough time to do everything. And like, and there was we went to a lot of different iterations of how much time you would have and like how much things would cost and everything like that. It was just a huge task to kind of balance that correctly. And obviously I think they've done a really good job, because most people's experience is like yours. Time is there, and it is this kind of ever-present ominous tick, 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 tick. You're running out of time, but it's not unfair either. And most people have managed to get through it as satisfactory, maybe not solving everything. But the thing it suddenly changed, because we have 1,000 bits of evidence. We have a cast of 20-something characters. We have nearly 40 mysteries. And suddenly when you have time, you can't click on everything in every room. You can't talk to every character about every single thing. And a big part of the detective experience is then go, okay, well, I have to think now about what's the most efficient next step I can make. Is it to ask about this thing? Is it to ask this character or that character over there? I know this thing is about, you know, Irish Druidism. Who's the right person to ask? And taking a moment to think about those things rather than going, okay, I'm going to take item A and item B and smash them together to make eventually one thing combination is going to work. I'm going to present every item to this character until they give me the next step of the plot, which is a big, you know, brute force thing that happens in classic adventure games, point and clicks. We wanted to train the player to think differently, and to take pause and to consider what they know and consider what would be the best next step to kind of take.
Yeah, because especially with the time mechanic you put in, I did the whole what you're kind of expected to do in a game like Blake Manor, which is just to explore and click on everything. I could see how I was rapidly starting to use up time, and it kind of dawned on me at some point that I shouldn't be clicking on all the pictures and all the ornaments and all that kind of stuff. And that was quite a cool revelation for me in on itself. So that was a cool moment.
And it's weird, like, to create so much content that the player's not meant to see. Like that you can go into this room and there's all these paintings and they all have little tidbits and you can learn stuff. And we dangle that in front of you and go, don't click on this. But sometimes there's beneficial things to click on them all. And like a lot of the time you can learn the same information through different ways by exploring, and you might find a letter that tells you the same thing someone else will tell you if you ask them a question. Or you ask about the character A about character B and they'll reveal a secret. So we do try to reward whatever way you choose to explore. Not always, but we tried to there was no wrong way to advance apart from to advance blindly, was the intent.
I think the game is really well balanced with that time mechanic that people can muck it up, but they can still bring it back. So it's been really well implemented mechanic.
Yeah, thank you. I'll pass it on to Tressa. I mean, as I say, she worked incredibly hard in getting that balance right.
Obviously, you mentioned about the characters in the game. There's quite a lot. Did you say there was 20, wasn't there?
I think it's 25 characters, not counting the missing woman or the Declan Ward, the detective himself. So there's 25 character mysteries, I guess is what I'm saying.
How was that, writing the characters? Was it fun? Was it difficult to come up with unique backstories for them?
Well, I think we started with something like potentially we came up with about 50 ideas of characters who had interesting reasons for being there and interesting mysteries and stuff. And we whittled it down to the whatever number we ended up with. We started just putting loads of different ideas together. And we started with something like 50 characters and we started cutting that back and folding them together and to find the most interesting. And we talked to the team about, well, does this grip you? Does that grip you? What's this telling? And we picked characters that sort of reinforced the themes of the game in a bunch of different ways, whether that was through their mythology, through their cultural history, through the parallels of what their people have gone through and the Irish people have gone through at that time. It wasn't that difficult to to find a lot of really interesting stories to kind of build on. We worked, we worked with cultural consultants for any character from, say, the characters from Egypt and Brazil and all that. We had consultants for all of them who kind of read through the storylines to give us some information from their perspective, made certain the language use was correct, made certain there was no accidental, faux pas or anything that we put in. And, when we just kicked them around a lot it was myself and kind of two other primary writers and a couple of additional writers would help. We were doing either a couple of barks for the mind map or that kind of thing, But it was just kicking around them until they sort of sounded distinct and unique and kind of going, okay, well, this story might not be that exciting. Like, what can we do to make it more exciting? And there were a couple of stories that were really quite boring for a long time, and we almost cut the characters. And then we went, okay, well, there's actually a lot of work in cutting the character now at this stage because there's they're involved in all these other bits. What can we do to make their stories way more interesting? And we really dug down. Well, okay, well, what if this character's going to do this thing? And what if this is their mystery? And what about this? And what about this? It's hard to talk about it without getting into spoilery, but one character. Without Lloyd Dupre, for example, the voodoo priest from New Orleans, he's a character who's with us from the demo that we pitched years ago, and we really liked. He's really interesting because to us he's interesting because in Ireland we have Saint Bridget, one of the patron saints of the country in Catholicism. She comes from the Irish goddess Bridget, and as the Irish went to America after the famine, they brought her with them, and she sort of became Maman Brigitte of part of the Haitian, the Loa. It's not the kind of Creole Loa, the wife of Baron Samedi. If I'm getting some of these facts wrong, apologies. Please don't come after me on the internet. But so that was interesting because we could then bring him in to talk about how that goddess had changed and how she was the same and how how faith changes when it's brought different places. It's kind of got that American Gods sort of feel to it. But his story was really, like, he was brought in for that reason, but his actual personal story was really quite boring until a few months before launch. And we went, oh, this is just not interesting. And we want to keep him because this other thing, we have to find, like, what's the most messed up thing he could be trying to do that fits inside of everyone. And, like, you know, I think we came up with some really fun stuff for him. It's some people's, like, one of their favorite things. It's a lot of, again, grief and tragedy, and you're trying to lean into the themes. But it was just lots of workshopping and lots of testing and lots of, like, just been open to people's ideas and going, okay, well, what if we did this? How can we make this? How can we do more with this, do more with this, and do more with this?
So obviously there's a lot of horror elements in the game that were superbly fed through the whole narrative. It kind of just gave enough drip feeding as you went through, and it built up without giving too much away. Was that hard to implement in the game?
We tried really hard to not overdo. We never wanted to do jump scares or gore or anything like that. We want to have just that sort of creeping dread, and we tried not to overdo it by having too many apparitions around the place. Our hope was that they're paced out enough that they'll catch you every now and then, because they're not so common that you're ready for it, but they're not so far apart that they're almost non-existent, you know. And again, that was just took a bit of balancing and such. But pacing it out, I really, all of it was just iterating and testing and trying as much as we could and going, can we stick a little thing in here? Would that be nice? Some of our ghost stories we don't really go into great detail on. You just see a glimpse of, like, something that happened in the past. And then some of them we go into a bit more detail, and getting that balance right was partially an element of time. We might have put in more fully fleshed out ghost stories. We had a lot more worked out, but we got in what we had time to get in, you know. That restriction of we can't do it all made us really think about what could we do, what's the best use of it, and again, what's the best pacing, and just moving stuff around and changing where the triggers were and using different tools in our belt to make certain that we pace them in a reasonable way that you'd still be hitting them on day 3 as well, you know.
The atmosphere of the game is one of the most impressive parts for me. I think it's an extremely hard thing to pull off, but Blake Manor oozes that mysterious and haunting feeling that you would get from watching a similar TV show on a Sunday night. Was that always, you know, something that you wanted to hit?
Absolutely. Atmosphere is one of the pillars in the pitch deck that we use to sort of sell the thing. Like, and you know, Clement did a great job with the music. Elvis did a great job with the sound design. All of Paul's art direction is just, it's very atmospheric. These big spaces with not that much happening in them, and then, like, these little moments around really all come together to really help sell that atmosphere. And we wanted you to have that sort of feeling of, like, being a bit on edge. And again, that tick, tick, tick as you do stuff is part of that. It all kind of came together. The art, the sound, the narrative, the mechanics, that moment-to-moment stuff all came together in a way that builds that atmosphere. But as I said, that was always the intention, not necessarily how we would get to it, but the feeling always wanted to be, this isn't like a gore horror, it's not a jump scare horror, it is a gothic horror, it is a folk horror, it's a slow, creeping dread that hopefully sits with the player long after the game's gone away. And for a lot of people it has.
Dave was such a cool person to talk to, and the time just flew by talking to him about the game. He shared some interesting facts about the game's development, and I loved hearing about the rooms of the manor they ended up cutting. Such fascinating stuff. But straight into our next interview, and not all the developers there were showcasing games. There were just a ton of industry people milling about, catching up with friends, checking out the games, and hoping to promote their next projects with each other. Meridith Gran was one such developer, and I had the chance to sit down with her to discuss her 2022 coming-of-age point-and-click game Perfect Tides, and its upcoming sequel, Perfect Tides Station to Station. But to start, I asked her how AdventureX had been so far.
It's been great. A little overwhelming. I feel like I don't really ever stop. Ever since I got here, I've just been having conversations with people, and I kind of need to retreat to get away from it sometimes. But, this is what I'd hoped for, that I would come here and find people that I could easily find common ground with and, just have conversations with people I never met before. I also am having a lot of conversations with people I know back in Philly, which is weird for all of us, but...
Sure, yeah. I was talking with Dave Gilbert earlier, and he was saying, you're quite close, you live quite close together. So that must be quite surreal to, have him around.
Yeah, that we just, we travel to all these places and then we hang out more here than we do at home. But we're busy with our lives at home, so I guess that's how it goes.
But can you give a little synopsis for the people who may not know what Perfect Tides is?
Sure. So Perfect Tides began as a game I made about a 15, 16-year-old girl surviving a year of her life in high school in the year 2000. And it was my first game. I had been making comics for many years. I wanted to do something different. And my favorite genre of games had always been these point-and-click adventures from the 90s that, kind of that golden age of Sierra games that really inspired me. So that was sort of my challenge to myself. Could I make a game like that? And the more I thought about that, the more I wanted to tell stories of my own life and, tell something that I thought was more truthful and less fantastical. So Perfect Tides represents a year of a teenage girl who might be like you or me in the year 2000, just sort of navigating those early days of the internet and kind of these early personal relationships that she's never experienced before. And I have now been working on a sequel to that, Perfect Tides Station to Station, which is that, but in college, instead of wandering around collecting little bits off the ground and seeing what you can do with them. A lot of the time you are very purposeful in what you do. You have a job, you have classes to go to, you're very busy managing all these things in your life. And your inventory largely consists of the names and the topics that you're collecting and writing about and trying to learn about, reading about. So you're kind of trading in information in this game a little bit more than little objects.
Yeah, with the original Perfect Tides, I loved how you managed to capture that, the time period in which it's set, but also that time period of a teenager. There's not many games that I've played where it's brought a lot of things back to me personally. Even when you're hanging out in the car with Jason and you don't really know what you're going to be doing. You're just going to go and hang out at a house or something. I thought that was really cool. I'm a 47-year-old man now. My teenage years have long gone, but it really brought back a few things that I'd completely forgotten about. And it's really interesting to know, was it hard to do, to implement these things into the game?
Well, I think I maybe sort of hinted at this when I said I started with something a little bit more genre, a little bit more fantastical, and it became more truthful as I wrote. And I think, what happened there was I gradually started to remember. And the more I lived in those memories, the more I was able to pull from them. So I took 4 years to make this game. And the second game has also taken 4 years. And I think that has really been necessary because almost that entire time I have been remembering things and putting them into perspective for the first time since I became an adult. I think people choose to forget a lot of things that happened when they were teenagers because it's very painful to look at directly. A lot of it felt very embarrassing, especially as they started to become an adult with more agency. They might have looked back on the way they felt as a teenager and say, this was frivolous, this was naive, this wasn't the real feeling. But to me, when I actually look back at those times, I realized that those were the real feeling. They were as far as I could take that feeling at that time. And I needed to feel that way in order to mature and become somebody, who could even reflect on those things. So what I seek to do in these games is find those things that are maybe a little too painful, a little too embarrassing to look back on, and really try to get to the essence of what was awesome, what hurt, what was life affirming or just life destroying about these times.
What was that experience like for you, going back to those kind of times when you was putting them and kind of remembering or reliving times from your teenage years?
It's kind of a meditative thing where I'll look back at a memory and I have kind of this knee-jerk idea of what that memory is. It is, kind of the last thing I felt about it before I put it to bed. And then I'll kind of reinterrogate those things, and I'll actually find ways in which I forgive myself for them, or maybe realize they were never my fault to begin with. A lot of it is really just like trying to find reconciliation for those memories.
Yeah, one of the elements, and obviously one of the strongest elements, is the writing of the game. How long did it take just to write the script?
I don't think I ever stopped writing. Like this time around, I've been working with an editor, and he'll ask me, when can we expect script block? And I'll say, I don't know, like a week after the game comes out, maybe I'll stop writing it. It's very hard to stop writing it because I'm still remembering more stuff right until the end. And then, I will eventually put this period of time to bed, but as long as there's still some excitement left in me to remember this time, as long as I'm still like, as things are still occurring to me and I'm still getting that spark of like, oh yes, this is potent, then I'm going to try to stick it in while I can.
Yeah, because I think when I was playing the game, I was really remarking on the writing in the game, and I really liked how you internally monologued the speech, what Mara was thinking. Was that always the case when you was developing the game, or was that something that came in further on the line?
I think, I always loved this aspect of point and click adventures where the narrator is a little cruel to the character. The character is stupid. The character is going to walk right off a cliff, and the narrator is going to say, well, that wasn't a very smart idea. And, to me, that is the inside of the character's mind. They're being critical of themselves, and who is more critical of themselves than a teenager? So it kind of seemed perfect to have this sort of punishing second person narrative describing the thoughts of a teenager.
With Perfect Tides set in the early 2000s, you made a real effort to include technology and pop culture references from that time period. Many that I had forgotten about, but some I'm very fond of, like the modem dial-in, waiting for it to connect. I guess you probably didn't need to include things like that, but you did, and it made the experience so much more rewarding for me as a player. How was that for you, putting all that kind of stuff into the game, like the instant messaging of that time period and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think I tried to make the game as timeless as possible. I don't just want people who grew up in that time period to get something out of it. So what I really try to highlight is like those things about the past that were meaningful, and like to look for the meaning in them. The idea that you have to sign on to the internet, that you're not on the internet and your friends are not accessible to you and you're not accessible to them. There's this boundary, and a lot of the time you have to go through great struggle to get past that boundary, to get to this world out there that is not your real life, that is very distinct from your real life. And I thought that was important to highlight, like this impatience she has to access this world that's kind of a rare thing that's really only existed for a little while, and that we don't really have we don't have an incredible understanding of at this point in time. Like Mara's mother is completely baffled by it. She doesn't understand why her daughter's on the computer all the time, so all she can do is worry. She doesn't know who these people she's talking to are. And to me, all of this is very relevant to the time period. And it's not as if there aren't versions of that now that people can understand. But I think it is important to remember that like the internet did have these boundaries at some point, and that we had to actively seek out that online world.
Boundaries that we could possibly do with today still. But yeah, like the whole dynamic of the family, Mara's family, were really interesting to me. Like the way the relationship that she had with her brother and with her mum and everything. It was really, really relatable. Like I see it with my sons, brothers being brothers. Was that based on any true life experiences, or was that, just something you wrote for the game?
I wouldn't try to write siblings if I didn't have them. To me, like those relationships with siblings are like so specific and very painful, and a lot of the time a little too real.
Obviously, you've mentioned Perfect Tides Station to Station, which is coming out next month. January, sorry. Getting ahead of my... For some reason, I thought it was December straight away there. But yeah, it's coming out in January. Why did you make a sequel?
As soon as I released the first game and saw the reaction it was getting, I started thinking about the sequel. I think I by releasing this game, I was really... I was getting all of these ideas of a certain age down. And then I was putting it out into the world, and I was getting people reflecting those experiences back at me in their own words. And it was enormously affirming and therapeutic to receive that. And it made me think about, like, what is it about 15, 16 that made it so potent for me? And then I started thinking about 18, 19, and then my mind went straight to like, no, this is it. This is the year where things happen. This is the real stuff I need to write about. And I felt like it was just irresistible, the thought of doing what I had done, looking at college years the way I had looked at high school years.
Mara's struggles to become a writer bleeds into the new writing mechanic that you've included in the sequel. What can you tell us about this writing element that you have added, and why did you feel you needed to add it?
Yeah, I felt like we need to have a little bit of a thumb on the scale of what Mara is doing, even though ultimately, like, she's not really kind of an empty vessel of a character. She has this inner life that we're sort of crafting the texture of. So I felt like helping her choose topics and then helping her develop those topics by learning and talking and thinking about them. I felt like that was a way to give like a little bit of decision making to the process of finding her voice, which is what you're doing in this game.
Yeah, when I experienced that for the first time, I thought it was really cool, like inclusion in the game. I was thinking I was going to get more of the first game in the second game, but obviously, like you say, with Mara being a bit older. But so to see this new writing mechanic being implemented was really exciting for me. Is there any other new elements that you've added into the sequel that mixes up the gameplay at all?
Yeah, there's quite a few mini games in this one. Any time where I feel like I can add a little bit of gameplay to a particular kind of feeling or just like meaningful memory, meaningful experience.
Station to Station is releasing on the Nintendo Switch this time. How excited are you to have a game on a Nintendo system? And, do you have any plans to port the original over?
So yeah, there is like a 7-year-old part of me that is very excited to have a Nintendo game. In practice, it's I don't know that it's ever been easy to develop a game for Nintendo, but it does still seem like it will be very gratifying to do so. And yes, I would like, once the development of the Switch version of Station to Station is complete, then taking all of those UI elements and the way it plays and applying that directly to the previous game.
Because it must be quite hard to port a point-and-click game over to a console.
Yeah, you really do need to think about the game feel of the controller and like how you can easily move her, easily select things. But yeah, I think it's coming along pretty well so far. It is probably the thing we're working the hardest on right now to refine. But I think it's going to play very well.
And I just have one last question, Meridith, before I let you go. Back to the original game quickly. And that's just the island that is set on Perfect Tides. Like, is that based off a real-life location?
So there's a resort town off of Long Island, off the coast of Long Island, called Fire Island. And it is specifically like a gay party haven in the summertime. But it's also, just kind of like a place where people get like extremely expensive coastal mansions. But yeah, I was always fascinated with the idea that there are people who live there year round. And I would say now that number has diminished down to almost nothing. But back in the 90s, I think there were around 100 people who lived on the island, even in the winter, which meant that it had its own elementary school, and that there were children who knew nothing but life on the island, life on Paradise. And I grew up on Long Island. I did not grow up on Fire Island, but I think, there is this like process of exaggeration that we go through when we're writing about ourselves, where we want everything to be a little more lonesome, a little more isolated, a little more naive even. And I think that's where I was going with this, that I was reaching into something a little bit more extreme and dreamy than my own experience to show the reality of my own experience.
Meridith was great. It was such a privilege to share a table with her and chat about her game. If you haven't experienced Perfect Tides before and you like point and clicks, then this could be the perfect title for you. Moving on to our last interview of the episode, and there was one person in attendance that I knew I had to speak to. Friend of the show, Saly Beaumont, was here all weekend, and we did make plans to meet up for a chat. Unfortunately, we just couldn't make it happen, which you'll hear why in our chat, which we recorded after we returned home. Saly is such a star, and she had so much love for everyone at the show. But here we not only discuss her experiences of AdventureX, but also how she approached her role of Olivia D'arcy from the Séance of Blake Manor. Saly, it's great to catch up with you. We obviously tried to do so at AdventureX. Bit of a manic couple of days for you, really, wasn't it?
It really has. It took me about an hour and a half to get across the exhibition hall, which is, it kind of feels like a humble brag, like, oh, I'm so popular. But it was just so many brilliant people in one place. It's very, very hard to actually carve out some time to chat. So I'm really glad you kind of came back to me and gave me a chance to have my little say on AdventureX, because I really love it.
Yeah, because I obviously saw you out and about, and I thought, oh, there's Saly. And I was like, okay, cool. Maybe I'll just lurk in the background and, be that kind of weirdo while I wait for her to finish her conversation with the person. But then another person would rock up before I could get a chance. Yeah. And I was like, that's just kind of like, it was kind of like the pattern of the weekend. But it was so great to see so many people wanting to talk to you. And I hope that just kind of gave you an AdventureX experience to remember.
It really did. I mean, I think my first AdventureX was 2017, and they've all really just kind of taken me in. I'm now part of the AdventureX furniture, really. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's just really lovely how everybody really wanted to just kind of meet me in real life, which is really cool.
Yeah.
Because we obviously haven't really been able to do that for the last 5 years or so. And also just how many people wanted to say how much they liked Old Skies as well. That was really lovely.
Yeah, you even had a cosplay, didn't you?
I did. This is my first one. I was thrilled. I genuinely, I kind of had this sort of almost like this blank in my brain because I just didn't know what to do with myself. I was encountering a character that I'd been playing for 3 years in the flesh in front of me. Somebody liked her enough to cosplay her, and she's right in front of me, and I just kind of was like, I'm so overwhelmed with feelings. It was just incredibly flattering. Cosplayers are amazing. The attention to detail on that costume was incredible. Yeah. But yeah, just the surreal moment of meeting a character that I've played in real life. That's mad.
Yeah, no, I saw the pictures, and the costume looked really, really good. She really did a good job. And then the two of you putting your hands out like the in that picture was awesome. I can imagine what it's like being at one of these shows in a while, and then going there and it being like how it was for you. It must have been just really, well, I guess it was overwhelming, but very
a bit, yeah. In the loveliest way, and just the kind of realization that so many people know me and know my work. It can be very easy to lose sight of that. when you're working from home a lot, that you sort
Yes, exactly.
of go, oh, who am I? I'm just, in my little box recording all the time, and then just kind of being able to meet people who really like my work, and hearing that in person is actually, I've found it quite moving in places. Yeah. And I got to hang out with Dominic Armato, which is
There you go.
incredible. So that's proper pinch me stuff,
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, there were so many people that I didn't get to talk to because I didn't even know that they were there, and I kind of wish I'd had some kind of like big flag to wave around so that I could just get them to come to me.
I think that's kind of one of the things I wasn't expecting from the weekend. Was like, I looked at the schedule, I could see the people that were coming, the people doing panels. I knew what games were coming, but I didn't really realise how many people from the industry would just show up and hang out, kind of thing.
I think it does a really good job threading the needle between consumer facing and industry facing. And that's not always something that's easy to pull off. But I think for so many of us in the industry, we are also the players. So that line is pretty blurred. But yeah, every year the talks are phenomenal. Like the quality level of the talks and the fact that they are filmed so beautifully and put on YouTube is brilliant. And I'll sometimes get messages from someone about my talk from 2018 and stuff, and the fact that they're so useful, I think that's why it's kind of an industry kind of draw, really. I think a lot of work gets done in that weekend. A lot of jobs get organised and things.
Yeah, I bet they do. Yeah,
I kind of, in some ways, I wish it was longer so that I could have had more of these sort of like longer conversations with people. But also, I'm just not sure I have the endurance. I'm finished at the end of the 2 days. I'm just exhausted.
You're kind of talked out, aren't you?
Yeah, in the loveliest possible way. But I think I probably did all of the socialising I could have done in 2024 in that one weekend.
Yeah.
Like, there was more people to speak to than I have in the previous year. And just, so brilliant. And there's so many cool people.
Obviously, you were part of a panel at AdventureX for the talk on finding the funny comedy writing in adventure games.
That's right.
A subject that to me sounds very difficult.
Really?
Yeah, I do actually. Yeah, I think comedy writing can be hard, can't it? I think you kind of have to know what's going to be funny and not people, just go, that was a corny. That's too corny,
I don't know. That's kind of where my humour lives, really. I did make a jam game that was almost entirely a vehicle for my terrible puns, and it is just all the way through. And I kind of enjoy that level of humour.
But I think there's a balance there as well, isn't it? Yeah. Like you can still go a certain way with it, where people might just not find it completely funny, but then you can get to. If you go the right direction, you can still get those corny jokes in and still hit.
Yeah, I mean, comedy is so subjective. You've really got to know your audience and know the kind of like the comedy arena that you're setting up. So if you tell your players that you're creating something that is going to be full of puns, then they kind of go along for the ride. But if you tell them, you're making something very serious and dramatic and then suddenly put a pun in, I mean, that can sometimes be very useful as a dramatic device, but like largely you're not going to get a laugh from that. So a lot of it is kind of setting up expectations. This idea of a joke being the setting of an expectation and then the subversion of it is a really useful concept. But also I do kind of think that some comedy is just doing something really confidently. Just like doing it 100%. It's quite hard to be kind of aloof and cool and also funny. And I always say that I'm a very earnest person. I love things with my whole heart, and I am very silly. I enjoy being silly. And if something can be sillier, I will make it sillier, and kind of build on that. Yeah, that sometimes just sort of saying to a player or an audience, here's where we're going comedy-wise, and then go with it. Because, of course, when you're making a game, you don't have the same kind of feedback like if you were doing stand-up or doing theatre and stuff. In stand-up, you can read the room and work out whether a joke is landing and you should build on it, or it has really fallen flat and you should move on. You don't get that luxury when you're making a game, which is, I guess, why setting expectations, and I guess to a certain extent marketing as well, is really, really important. So you get the right players playing your game. But yeah, I mean, I'm surprised you think comedy writing is hard, but of course it is. It's very hard. But I think possibly not for the same reasons a lot of people think it's hard. I really enjoy writing comedy, and I enjoy writing in different flavors of comedy. So as long as I know the type of thing that I'm doing, I can just kind of charge ahead with it, really.
This was the part of my question about, how do you tackle such a thing in adventure games, especially, that bring that comedy to a high standard within the game?
I don't know. A part of the reason that I make a lot of jam games is because I like to experiment, and then I get to see how players respond to that. And I'm very grateful to streamers for streaming my games, because I genuinely get to see somebody enjoying or not my jokes, and I enjoy that sort of back and forth. And I guess doing a thinky face now. What was the question?
Just like how you tackle comedy writing in adventure games and bring that comedy to a high standard.
I think high standard that's a complicated question, because everybody's idea of comedy is slightly different. But yeah, I think particularly with adventure games, there is this tendency to kind of harp on previous tropes, previous games, and the thing where, is this game Broken Sword or Monkey Island? Which is it? Those are the two adventure games you can make. And I think I do have a rule about references, that if I make a reference and that person hasn't played the game I'm making reference to, if that reference will pull them out of the game, if that will make them feel outside the game or like they don't belong playing the game, then I cut it. If I can put it in there and it just exists and it's a little moment for players who understand the reference, okay, that's fine. But I don't ever want it to feel like a club that if you haven't played a very particular Sierra game from the 90s, you don't belong in my game. So I have to be very careful about that. But I quite like subverting some of those jokes and sort of taking them and turning them on their head, so that players that have played those games can have that expectation subverted again. So, comedy. Yeah, I think the other thing is just trying things out with other people. I don't necessarily think of writing as something that I do silently alone. It's something that I share with my friends. I'll try a joke out on my family. The rest of the team that I'm working with, I will be like, is this funny, or have I been writing for too many hours? And, in those processes, and it's especially good if the team start to then kind of yes and what you're doing, go, oh, you could do, actually I could make this joke funnier if I animate this, and then you're really cooking, because it is a collaborative form. It has to have everyone pulling in the same direction, and everyone brings their own stuff to each of the elements. So if your artist can play on the joke further or bring a new element to it, that's really exciting. I think the idea of the sort of Byronic hero writer sort of alone in their attic with their quill pen, that's not really how game writing works at all. And it's definitely iterative, and sometimes you'll put a joke in and the sound department will say, actually, we've got something happening in Act 3, and your joke has just ruined it, or we've already designed something for this, so you can't make this joke at this point. Can you move the joke to? And it becomes like an ongoing construction. And I think that's maybe how you bring it to a high quality, is that you're working with the team as a whole, rather than it being a writer who hands down their vision and all the other team have to make it come true. It's a team sport, and it really helps if your team has the same sense of humor as you.
Yeah, absolutely. Since we last spoke, the Séance of Blake Manor has released,
Yes.
where you voiced Olivia D'arcy. How's that experience for you?
Great. Honestly, I love playing her. She is awful in a very liberating way. I've been involved in the project for several years, actually. I got to see a really, really, really early build. And I think one of the first things we recorded for that was something that was being eavesdropped. And as soon as you've got eavesdropping in your game, I'm in because I am nosy. It does really help if you're enthusiastic about the game that you're working on. I mean, it's such a good game, just top to bottom quality. But yeah, so I came back to play Olivia, which is very cool. And I think she was kind of partly written with me in mind, which is very flattering. Hopefully not because she's awful. But the script that they had written for her was just, it was so much fun to get my teeth into. So many things where I could give just really nasty subtext on a seemingly lovely sentence. That was really good fun for me. Yes, she's very waspish. That is the word that I settled on. Very waspish.
That's a good description of Olivia. Yeah, definitely. Well, obviously, I played the game to finish. So I know who did it.
Shh,
but
spoilers.
Yeah, but. Yeah, when I always met Olivia, when I needed to go to see Olivia for questioning and all that kind of stuff, like she would always greet me to say, Mr. Ward, it's so nice of you to see me. Oh no, was it? You've come back to me. That's it.
You've come back to me, Mr. Ward.
That's it. And like,
I love that. Like, oh, you again.
Yeah, exactly. And I was like, it's kind of like a unique greeting. And I felt this was kind of like a bit of a Saly creation. Am I reading into that wrong? Or, did you have...
I didn't write that. No. And I think that must have been... I think that line was quite early on, certainly a couple of years ago when I was recording bits then. And we re-recorded it more recently. Sometimes you'll find a sentence, to speak for the writers, where it just really sums up the character so beautifully. And I have had so many people at AdventureX come back to me and say, Miss Beaumont, you've come back to me. Yeah. I think when people start imitating a voice line you've recorded, that's really cool. You've really got them. Mm-hmm. That you've got under their skin.
It made her memorable.
Yeah, I mean, she's a lot of fun. But I think because she's a novelist and she's kind of aloof and she kind of thinks she knows better than everyone, it's almost like she's kind of narrating her life, where she's far too clever to be caught up in all this nonsense. And when he keeps coming back to her, I think it's partly that she's kind of spotted what he's about, what he's doing, and is sort of trying to make some moves to outwit him a little bit. And she feels very confident that she is going to outwit this silly Mr. Ward. I drift into the voice so easily. I loved playing her. She's a lot of fun.
I mean, it was quite a different performance from you. How did you approach Olivia when you were trying to decide, how to voice her?
Well, so I saw the art really early on, and so I knew exactly what she looked like. And in the game where you can kind of examine people without them noticing and see all the things that are going on with them. And I remember seeing her facial expression and really trying to pull that into the voice, because of course the British stiff upper lip does actually have a real meaning, and it does really impact the way that you speak. And things like she looked open and welcoming, but her hands are clenched together. And like, that's a beautiful bit of internal conflict. This is someone who wants everyone to think she's relaxed and better than everybody and all of the rest of it. But something is underneath that is making her nervous and vulnerable. that she doesn't want anyone to know. And so keeping that sort of those two ideas in mind was what I was trying to do with her. And I also think just being an English person in an Irish game really gives you a license to be a real jerk, a villain. That's what I'm there for. And she's dreadful to everyone. But that she's dreadful about Ireland as well. So, she deserves it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you're sort of saying she's kind of different from, say, Fia, for example, in Old Skies.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting that before Old Skies came out, the sort of role that I'm doing in Séance of Blake Manor would be more considered the type of thing that I do, because I quite often am brought in to do an NPC who's maybe a bit flamboyant or dramatic in some way, and Fia is such a different kind of, not quite deadpan, but very kind of subtle character, and it's really interesting to see people going, oh, that's not very Fia-ish. I'm like, yes, actors contain multitudes. That's what we do. But yeah, so for me, being a theatre actor as well in the past, I can sort of pull in lots of theatrical stuff. So, lots of Noel Coward sort of references in her that she let me use a lot of the kind of musicality, which you can hear in my real voice. I'm quite musical. I use my full range of pitch. I use my voice in all sorts of interesting ways for emphasis. And it was really cool to be able to use that for Olivia, this sort of almost like she's singing to you. And that's kind of part of the artifice. And I don't want to spoil it for anyone, because that game is full of spoilers and I don't want to ruin it, because it's great. But there are moments in it where she is very vulnerable, and it was really cool to be able to drop some of the artifice in her voice, but still keep it sounding like her, but a much more kind of grounded, scared, human person that I don't know if you felt a little bit sorry for her. Maybe a little bit?
Yeah, a little bit.
A little
bit.
You're like, oh, I've kind of been hating you this whole time, but you're actually a person. Oh no. And I do kind of like to mess about with that even the biggest villain thinks they're the hero of their own story. And that's a really useful thing that I try to bear in mind when I'm playing these characters. But yeah, she was a lot of fun. You can probably tell.
Yeah, definitely. It came through for sure.
Good. Because
of the type of game Blake Manor is, meant that you probably had to record many lines that may not have been heard by a player.
Yes.
But like, how many different lines did you have to record for Olivia in this one?
I don't know off the top of my head. We only did a 2-hour recording session.
Oh, okay.
And we were doing, like maximum 3 takes per line, just to keep the session moving. And I think I definitely had an advantage because I'd played her before, so I kind of was ready to drop into the role and kind of really kind of got what was going on. But we obviously, because you don't always get a lot of context for lines, and so sometimes you have to rely on the director, which is Liv Smith, to sort of fill you in what's actually happening around you. And sometimes it's quite surprising in that game. You sort of see this one line and you think, oh, what's going on there? And then you get sort of a 5-minute explanation of something absolutely bizarre. And you're like, okay, what should I do with this? There's a really innocuous line, which is where she's talking to Mr. Dupre, who is a lovely character as well. And I had sort of thought she was kind of chatting him up a little bit, trying to charm him. And she's sort of saying, oh, they speak French in Louisiana, don't they? And she's sort of trying to go, look how knowledgeable and worldly I am. And then Liv goes, no, that's why she won't go to Louisiana, because of the French. I'm like, oh, they speak French in Louisiana, don't they? And that's a great example of a director that can flip your understanding of that line, of that character, of what's going on in that scenario. And that's one of the joys of voice acting, is both of those takes were probably serviceable, but they tell you very different things about that person and the situation you're in and the wider game as well. yeah, so it wasn't a long session, and I would super love to come back, because there are sections that are not voiced, and I understand for practical reasons why, but I would love to come back and do all the rest.
Hopefully down the line they might be able to do that for you. Like I mentioned there, obviously there's a lot of lines that you probably recorded that majority of players may not get to hear, and and I've kind of always wondered what that's like for the voice actor, I guess, knowing that might be the case, and you obviously still put your all into those lines.
Yeah, of course.
Does that have an impact on you at all, or are you quite happy with that knowledge?
Well, what it means is that when you meet someone that has played a game that you're in, the version of the character that's in their mind is often quite different from the one in your mind, and that's kind of magical because their version is completely unique to them and their playthrough. So I always view my role as a voice actor is to throw out like an offer to the director, to the developer, to say, here are my ideas. And they get to then kind of choose which of those takes fits their vision of the character. But of course, what I'm also doing is throwing out offers in terms of all the interactive dialogue options and storyline options, and that I can offer an idea of my character, but you can't really control the character that someone is going to experience as a player in the same way, in a different way that, if you make a film, you can control the character to an extent, although people will still get their own interpretations of it because that's the magic of subjectivity. But in a game, I don't ever worry about like, oh, they're not following the good version of my character, or they're not.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good argument for replayability. Like,
Yeah.
I think Blake Manor is a very replayable game, and it's fun to find out all those different options and things. But yeah, you can tell that I try not to kind of have a tight ownership over a character. That it's another person's experience of them, and they get to enjoy that. And yeah. I mean, it was the same with Old Skies. That one of the themes of Old Skies is about all the paths that you can take in life, and as a time traveler, you get to see all of them, but you never get to really participate in life. And I guess being a voice actor in games is a little bit like that you can see all the different versions of your character that they could experience, but you're the only one that knows all of them. So you get a really weird interpretation of the character that not necessarily anybody else has. Maybe the developer does too.
And moving away from Blake Manor, you have an involvement in another game called Heartspell.
Yes, I do.
Yeah. What can you tell us about that game, and who you're voicing? And
I actually get to narrate the whole game, so
wow,
they're very exciting.
Cool.
So it was sort of like a cross between an audiobook and a video game for me. But yeah, I get to kind of narrate what's going on in the game and the consequences of all your choices in the game and stuff. So it's a match 3 game sort of crossed with a fantasy RPG, and you go to a wizarding school, and there's all sorts of mayhem going on at the wizarding school, and you have to save it. And you can meet a variety of very cool characters, and the game is flexible enough that you can be friends with everyone. You can have romantic interests with everyone. It gets a little spicy in places, which is very fun for me to narrate. Dire Kitten is the developer, and I have sort of said, you can really hear my eyebrows on that tape, can't you? In these sort of saucy eyebrows. There's nothing particularly like graphic. It's just all kind of implied, and
sure.
I think that's probably something. It's very useful to have a British accent on board to imply things.
Yeah.
But yeah, that has been great fun, and that has been a classic example of the thing you just asked me about, because of the level of interactivity in that game. I am voicing all sorts of possible outcomes to every situation, depending on your relationships in the game and what you've chosen to do earlier. So, we work around kind of nodes of the game, and kind of I'll do a paragraph about how you don't know anyone here, and then another about how you know one person here,
Mm-hmm.
and then how you know it can be that that detailed. It's been really exciting to work through it all. It's a fun game. And again, quite different from Old Skies. So I really like doing different things. I think it stretches you as an actor, and it keeps everything very interesting. There is a spell in Heartspell which is called Chrono Shift, which I hope is a reference to me.
Beautiful. That's amazing. I love it. We love Saly. She was so candid and honest about everything we discussed there. Hearing about her experiences at AdventureX just warmed my heart, and finding out more on Olivia D'arcy was an absolute joy. Please do go and check out the game or her previous works in games such as Old Skies, Harold Halibut, The Excavation of Hobbs Barrow, and many, many more. And look forward to part 2 of Saly's interview in the next episode of this podcast. And that's a wrap for the first AdventureX special. The event was a great way to spend a day or two hanging out with like-minded people and discovering some new games to add to our ever-expanding wish lists. I would like to thank the organisers for being such good hosts, making me feel welcome and looking after me. I would also like to say thanks to Dave, Mosu, Meridith and Saly for their time and openness in our conversations. But before I leave you, I'd just like to remind you all that we do have a Discord server where you can chat to the So Many Games crew and other like-minded people on video games, life and our work. We'd love for you to be a part of our community, and do come and say hello if you were at AdventureX. I'd love to hear your stories from the show. Don't forget to check out somanygames.co.uk for all our latest reviews, articles and interviews. Links to the Discord website, our Patreon will all be in the show description. Thank you for listening. Until next time, my name has been Jason. Please take care out there and happy gaming.